The first time I saw Karen tiptoe into my yard with a jug labeled "Special Vinegar Mix," I thought she was delivering homemade salad dressing. Turns out it was industrial weed killer, and she was spraying it directly onto my heirloom tomato vines. I was frozen at first, not with fear, but with disbelief that a woman in bright floral capris and wedge heels had just declared chemical warfare on my garden. My garden. The one I'd cultivated through 2 floods, a hailstorm, and a squirrel uprising. She looked up and waved like we were friends, like this was some casual Tuesday errand. "Your plants were getting too close to the property line," she called cheerfully, sloshing another generous pour onto my rosemary. "Just tidying things up for the HOA. The HOA didn't even cover our cul-de-sac. But Karen, being Karen, had declared herself an honorary enforcer. My jaw didn't drop. I didn't scream. I just took out my phone, snapped a picture, and said the calmest sentence I've ever uttered. "That's going to be a hell of a mistake, Karen." Karen moved in 6 months earlier, dragging with her an attitude that suggested she'd been crowned queen of suburbia somewhere between Pilates and Chardonnay. Her house was diagonally across from mine, and while the rest of us were just trying to keep our lawns mowed and trash bins upright, she was staging photo-ready topiaries, hiring drone photographers to capture her rose beds, and emailing fake citations to anyone with a blade of crabgrass. When she tried to demand we paint our fences white to match hers, the neighborhood group chat practically exploded with memes. But Karen didn't take mockery as a sign to slow down. If anything, it fueled her. I'd been her main target lately, mostly because my garden beds were a riot of color, crawling with mint and lavender and sunflowers, everything she deemed unruly. She wanted symmetry. I wanted pollinators. She wanted control. I wanted peace. Too bad we couldn't both have it. The day after the vinegar incident, I found 12 of my plants wilted into brown husks, the soil reeking like a science lab. I filed a police report for property damage, but the responding officer just shrugged and said it was a neighborly dispute. Karen walked outside during the report, wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat like she was auditioning for a pesticide commercial, and actually offered the officer lemonade. I stood there, arms crossed, watching the charade with the kind of simmering patience that only comes from growing things in dirt for 10 years. She waved at me over the cop's shoulder. "No hard feelings," she chirped. "You can always replant in pots." I smiled. "Oh, Karen. You absolute buffoon. You just poisoned a beekeeper's backyard." Here's something she didn't know. I manage a pollination program through the state university. I raise bees. I also happen to be on friendly terms with a wildlife rescuer who specializes in nuisance relocations. You know, raccoons, possums, and yes, skunks. So while Karen spent the next week adding patriotic bunting to her porch for her annual HOA-free freedom brunch, I spent mine coordinating with my friend Marty, who owed me a favor after I'd let him store a traumatized owl in my shed last winter. Marty didn't even blink when I said I needed a temporary skunk family. "Live or decoy?" he asked. "Live," I said. "But no spraying. I want drama, not lawsuits." He laughed. "I've got just the crew." Saturday morning before sunrise, while the dew was still clinging to Karen's oversized flags and solar lanterns, I installed a wooden crate under her porch step. Inside, 2 adult skunks and 3 squeaky babies, all dozing peacefully on shredded newspaper scented with calming herbs. I left a small trail of sardines and ducked back across the street. Then I waited. At 7:12 a.m., Karen's front door creaked open. Her white platform sandals stepped out, followed by a shriek so high-pitched it cracked a crow's call mid-air. She must have caught a glimpse of the black and white tail slinking under her rocking chair. Then came the slamming door. Then the text. "There's a skunk infestation," she screeched in all caps. "They're attacking my freedom brunch." I responded with a single emoji. The little gardening woman with a trowel. It sent her into a frenzy. By mid-morning, animal control had arrived. Karen was pacing in a silk robe, shouting into her phone about rabies and HOA-level emergencies. The officer tried to explain that the skunks weren't aggressive and were actually protected wildlife. He suggested she leave them alone and let them relocate naturally. That's when she turned and pointed directly at my house, accusing me of being a skunk terrorist. I sipped my tea and waved through the window. The animal control guy gave me a thumbs up. The skunks, bless them, were well behaved. They didn't spray. They just waddled around under the porch, occasionally poking their noses out during particularly loud episodes of Karen's wailing. The babies were adorable, and more than one neighbor stopped to coo at them from the sidewalk. Karen, however, was melting down. She canceled her brunch, blamed me for her social humiliation, and even tried to call the fire department. They refused to respond. She barricaded herself indoors for 2 days straight, curtains drawn, muttering about biological warfare. The thing is, I never told anyone what I'd done. Not officially. But Karen had alienated so many neighbors by then that no one believed she was the victim. Especially when she started accusing random passers-by of harboring wildlife vendettas. I let the rumor mill do the heavy lifting. I tended to my ruined garden and posted pictures of my new seedlings with captions like, "Rebirth through compost," and "Nature always wins." Karen, meanwhile, started issuing HOA-style warning notes again, except this time, someone kept smearing sardine oil on her mailbox. I have no idea who. Must have been another skunk sympathizer. Eventually, Marty came and collected the crate. He said the skunks had done their job and deserved a quiet release in the woods. I agreed. They'd been professionals. Unlike Karen, who by that point had installed motion-activated sprinklers, citronella torches, and something she claimed was a high-frequency pest deterrent, which mostly just made dogs bark non-stop for a block radius. She also hung a sign that said, "No trespassing, even for animals," as if skunks could read. My garden, believe it or not, bounced back. Plants are stubborn like that. And while I still catch Karen glaring at me from behind her lace curtains, I haven't had any more vinegar mix incidents. I did see her once at the grocery store, eyeing a can of Raid like it was a bottle of fine wine. She didn't say a word. Just gave me a tight smile and walked off toward the frozen foods. I didn't follow. I didn't gloat. I'd already won. Because some people play petty. Others play patient. And me? I just rent a skunk family and let nature do the talking. The week after the Great Skunk Siege, as Karen called it in her screechy neighborhood-wide emails, was unusually peaceful. Her porch had been power-washed 5 times, and she'd hired a scent specialist from 2 towns over to decontaminate the aura. She even had a priest swing by for a quick porch blessing, though I doubt the man knew he was being summoned for skunks. I saw the poor guy leave with a bewildered look, clutching a half-finished candle and muttering something about intense suburban energy. Meanwhile, I was back to nursing my garden like a battlefield medic. Most of the plants were scorched beyond hope, but a few hardy survivors, some kale, nasturtiums, and one spiteful little chili plant, were hanging on. I called that one Karen's regret. It kept growing toward her property line. I expected a brief cooling-off period, maybe even a long-overdue ceasefire, but I should have known better. Karen didn't operate on logic or shame. She ran entirely on passive aggression and misplaced superiority. The skunks had wounded her pride, and in the world of neighborhood drama, that was practically a declaration of war. Sure enough, on Tuesday morning, a bright orange code violation notice appeared on my mailbox. Not official city paper. Just a printed page with the HOA logo cut from a newsletter and glued on top like a kindergarten craft project. Violation. Unauthorized wildlife habitat. Fine. $250. I almost laughed. Karen had created a fake fine. She even added a QR code that linked to her PayPal. I took the flyer inside and scanned the QR code out of morbid curiosity. It led to a donation page titled "Restore Neighborhood Safety from Animal Attacks." The banner image was a zoomed-in, blurry photo of one of the skunk kits yawning adorably beneath her porch railing. Donations so far, $0. I posted the flyer in the group chat. Within minutes, someone replied with a meme of a skunk wearing a judge's robe, captioned, "All rise for the Honorable Justice Stinky." Karen left the chat 10 minutes later. Not that it slowed her down. The next day, I discovered a fresh new offense. Karen had leaned over the fence with pink chalk and scrawled, "Invasive Species Area," along the sidewalk in front of my garden bed. It rained that night, but I captured it on my security camera and made a time-lapse video of her sneaking out in slippers, writing the chalk words while tiptoeing like a villain in a kid's cartoon. I added dramatic music and uploaded it anonymously to Nextdoor. It went modestly viral. Someone offered to animate it. Another person offered to send me sidewalk-safe glow-in-the-dark paint to retaliate. I politely declined, but saved their info. You never know. I hadn't expected the garden incident to escalate into an all-out neighbor war, but then again, I underestimated Karen's ability to operate on fumes of narcissism and grievance. I figured it was time to escalate on my end, not with more animals or theatrics, but with something more devastating. Her own words. Karen had a habit of over-documenting her imagined superiority. Her personal blog, Cul-de-sac Queen, was a mess of unfiltered rants, bad garden advice, and detailed breakdowns of what she called civic interventions, like the time she bragged about calling the police on a kid's lemonade stand because the signage violated suburban visual symmetry. I spent a quiet evening archiving posts. One in particular stood out. A video rant titled, "Why HOA-Style Living Matters," even without an actual HOA. In it, Karen laid out her belief that communities function best when one person with vision takes the lead, by issuing guidance, enforcing visual standards, and managing neighborly alignment. The next morning, I printed transcripts of that post and slipped them into a few neighbors' mailboxes. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet, coordinated truth bomb. The ripple effects were immediate. At least 6 households that had stayed quiet during our feud suddenly piped up. 2 wrote, "We support gardens," signs and planted them in their yards. One guy built a miniature gnome-sized protest picket line at the edge of his lawn that said, "Down with the tyrant," in Sharpie. Someone else changed their Wi-Fi name to Karen Free Zone. I could practically hear her seething from across the street. She retaliated by calling the city about unauthorized signage, but her complaint backfired when the inspector found no violations, only a few well-placed decorative items and one gnome with a middle finger raised. When Karen tried to argue, the inspector asked if she was with the HOA. She said she represented the spirit of it. He wrote that down, slowly, with visible confusion, then left without another word. I made him a gift basket afterward. It included a honey jar labeled "locally farmed from formerly skunked grounds." Karen went quiet for a few days after that, which was unsettling. It's one thing to deal with open hostility, it's another to endure a calm before the storm. I knew something was coming, I just didn't know what. The answer arrived that Friday, in the form of a city citation nailed to the side of my mailbox. This one was real. A formal complaint had been filed, citing environmental hazards caused by uncontained composting, potential animal attractants, and, get this, use of non-standard irrigation systems. Karen had photos attached. Blurry, overexposed images clearly taken with a phone camera from behind her blind. She'd zoomed in on my compost bin and claimed it was attracting invasive pests, a term she seemed to apply interchangeably to skunks, bees, squirrels, and children on scooters. Now, the bin was legal. I knew that. But she'd piled the complaint high with buzzwords. Rodents, mold, runoff, just enough to trigger a mandatory inspection. The letter gave me 10 days to prepare. I wasn't worried, but I was annoyed. It was the sheer pettiness of it. Karen had made it her mission to micromanage nature, and I was the nearest target. So I did what I always do, I played the long game. First, I cleaned the compost bin like it was auditioning for a home and garden magazine. I scrubbed it, painted it, labeled it with a laminated sign quoting local compost ordinances. I even added a motion sensor solar light for good measure. Then, I hosted a little get-together that weekend. Just a few neighbors, a couple of lawn chairs, some lemonade. Right in the front yard, next to the garden bed, with Karen's house clearly in view. We played lawn games. Someone brought a portable grill. I handed out packets of bee-friendly wildflower seed. The vibe was chill, happy, united. Karen peeked from her blinds, phone in hand, presumably documenting us in case anyone performed an illegal cartwheel. The inspector arrived 2 days later. I was ready. Compost bin? Spotless. Garden? Clearly within property boundaries. Irrigation? A simple drip system with a water timer. He nodded, took notes, and said the photos looked suspiciously edited. Is that a skunk in the corner of this one? He asked, squinting at one printout. I leaned in and smiled. Looks like it, doesn't it? Not sure where she got that. He closed the file and said, Yeah, we're not pursuing this. Another win. That evening, I received a passive-aggressive email from Karen with the subject line, Friendly Reminder about neighborhood health standards. It was a wall of text about pest control and compost best practices, ending with a veiled threat about escalating things to city council. I forwarded it to a few neighbors just to share the comedy. One of them replied, We should start a skunk appreciation club. Another added, With Karen as our mascot. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Karen was beginning to lose credibility. What she didn't realize was that her greatest weapon, her self-importance, was also her biggest weakness. And I was going to use it against her. I wasn't just playing the long game anymore. I was setting the board, piece by piece. And soon, Karen wouldn't even realize she was in checkmate until it was far too late. Karen's next move came in the form of a clipboard, a nervous teenager, and a petition. I spotted the kid wandering house to house one afternoon, clutching a few wrinkled papers and offering awkward half-smiles like he was selling cursed vacuum cleaners. It didn't take long for him to end up at my doorstep, where he shifted from foot to foot like a stork trying to quit mid-flight. Hi sir. I'm collecting signatures for a, community improvement initiative. He held out the clipboard like it was radioactive. I took one look and saw the title, Petition for Neighborhood Beautification and Wildlife Control. There it was, Karen's latest scheme, dressed up with a name that sounded like it came from a suburban marketing agency powered by anxiety and essential oils. I scanned the content. It was 5 bullet points of pure passive-aggressive nonsense, each one more ridiculous than the last. Items included a ban on free-form gardening that does not conform to neighborhood standards, removal of unregulated composting bins, and a licensed review committee to evaluate wildlife threats. She wanted to create an actual HOA-style panel, chaired, obviously, by herself. It was like a child throwing a tantrum and demanding the role of sheriff in a game no one agreed to play. The kid must have sensed my amusement because he added quickly, I think she said there'd be snacks for people who signed. Cookies or something. Poor kid. I didn't blame him. Karen probably spun a tale about taking back the neighborhood, and lured him in with sugar and parental guilt. I handed the clipboard back. Tell Karen I'll sign her petition the day a skunk runs for president. And I'll vote for the skunk. He blinked, then smiled. Yeah, I didn't think anyone was really signing it. He turned and walked away, already texting someone, probably updating Karen or maybe just warning others not to waste their time. Within an hour, the group chat was lit up. Photos of the petition. Karen's handwritten margins in pink ink with hearts around mandatory porch inspections. And then the kicker. Someone had taken a photo of Karen at her kitchen table, pointing at a chart titled Future HOA Leadership Roles. She'd assigned herself president, secretary, and lead compliance officer. Her husband, Todd, was listed as vice president, but only if he behaves. I didn't know what Todd had done to deserve that title, but judging by the look in his eyes at the last block barbecue, I suspected he'd made the fatal error of suggesting maybe, just maybe, she let things go once in a while. By now, Karen's attempts to formalize her tyranny were becoming so transparent it was almost funny. But I knew better than to relax. Karen had money, time, and a pathological drive to control everything within a 200-foot radius of her sprinklers. So while most of the neighborhood dismissed her with jokes and memes, I started playing a deeper game. I filed for a permit. Not just any permit. A community educational demonstration garden permit, which turned my property into a semi-protected green space with city recognition. It came with signage, occasional foot traffic, and most importantly, a protective designation that made it harder for people to interfere with my planting choices or file bogus nuisance claims. I filled out the application, submitted photos of my pollinator habitat, and included a letter of recommendation from a biology professor at the local college, who also happened to be a childhood friend and thought my story was hilariously dystopian. When the permit came through, I held a small ribbon-cutting ceremony. A couple of neighbors showed up with folding chairs and cookies. I printed laminated signs that said, "Official Garden Zone. Do not disturb wildlife," and installed them along the fence, in clear view of Karen's house. One of them included a QR code that linked to an article titled, "Why Skunks Are Important to the Ecosystem." I knew she'd scan it. She couldn't help herself. By that evening, I had a formal email in my inbox from Karen. Subject line, "Disturbing Trends in Neighborhood Messaging." The body was 3 paragraphs long, all about how certain individuals were provoking unrest and disrupting suburban harmony with sarcasm disguised as landscaping. I didn't reply. I just forwarded it to the city's community gardening office with a smiley face. The next day, her petition disappeared. She never mentioned it again. But of course, that didn't mean Karen gave up. No, she pivoted. Her new plan? Noise complaints. It started subtly. A knock on my door one morning from a city officer, clipboard in hand. Got a report of excessive buzzing. I blinked. Buzzing? He pointed vaguely toward the garden. Bees. I nodded. Yes. I'm a registered apiarist. He sighed. Yeah. I figured. Just had to check. You wouldn't believe the call I got. She made it sound like you were training them to attack. I almost choked. What? She used the phrase weaponized pollinators. I thought I was being pranked. We both stared at each other for a beat, then burst out laughing. I offered him a jar of honey. He accepted. Then came the second complaint. Irregular nighttime activities. Translation. I'd installed a motion-activated watering system, and the sprinklers were going off at 2 a.m. Karen claimed I was operating unlicensed hydromechanics under cover of darkness. I had to explain to another poor soul from the city that it was literally just a $30 Amazon timer, not a Bond villain lair. That guy didn't even bother writing anything down. He just took a photo of the system and told me, "You're fine." She's a lot. But Karen's piece de resistance came during her self-declared neighborhood harmony meeting. She hosted it at her house on a Saturday afternoon, complete with catered finger sandwiches and pitchers of lukewarm cucumber water. I didn't attend, of course. Neither did most of the street. But a few curious souls went, mostly for the sandwiches, and came back with tales that would have made Orwell weep. She had a PowerPoint, with slides titled, "The Threat of Free Will in Gardening, Porch Purity," a vision, and, my personal favorite, the Skunk incident, a case study in anarchy. She'd printed out blurry photos of my yard, annotated with arrows and red circles, and at one point even held up a jar of honey like it was a biohazard. One of the attendees said she finished with a dramatic reading of the dictionary definition of civilization, followed by the announcement that she was founding a Coalition for Controlled Community Growth, or CCCG. Several people left during that part. Her husband, Todd, apparently stood in the corner the entire time sipping wine straight from the bottle. Needless to say, the meeting backfired. The next day, someone updated the group chat icon to a skunk holding a pitchfork. Someone else updated Karen's contact name to Buzzkill Queen. But even worse, for her, was the fact that people started actively asking me for gardening tips. One guy from the next street over dropped by with questions about composting. A new couple asked where to get native milkweed. I gave away seed packets and watched Karen seethe from behind her blinds. That's when I realized the war wasn't just about her trying to control me. It was about her trying to control everyone. And people were finally done playing along. Her noise had become background static. Her drama, a meme. And me? I was just the gardener. The calm, sarcastic gardener playing chess while she frantically tossed checkers around the board. The paperwork was signed, sealed, and smirking from its envelope. I stared at the deed like it was a blueprint for vengeance, and in a way, it was. The property behind Karen's house had sat empty for years. A wild, weedy half-acre too narrow to build on, too forgotten for most people to bother with. But I'd seen the potential. Not for resale. Not for construction. For a message. A botanical, bee-filled, bird-chirping message that would blossom day after day just beyond Karen's white vinyl fence. It was poetic justice disguised as landscaping. I called it Phase 2. I waited exactly 3 days before making my move, because I wanted her to be just unsettled enough. On the 4th morning, a small work crew pulled up in front of the lot. Nothing fancy. Just a couple of guys in neon vests unloading wheelbarrows, stakes, and a tiller. I met them with coffee and pointed them toward the fence line. Karen, true to form, was watching through her upstairs blinds, silhouette sharp against her paisley curtains. It didn't take her long to come outside. She marched down the side of her yard like a mall cop in a hurry, plastic sandals slapping the concrete with righteous purpose. "Excuse me," she called, hands on hips. "You can't just start building things back there. That's protected land. That's a flood zone. That's a—" She trailed off when she saw me standing calmly next to the lot marker, holding a rolled-up blueprint. "Morning, Karen," I said. "Lovely day for pollinator habitat expansion, don't you think?" She blinked. "You don't own this land." I smiled, held up the deed, and unrolled it like a magician revealing a rabbit. "Actually, I do. Bought it from the county last month. Closing went through Monday." Karen's eyes narrowed like she was trying to vaporize the paper with pure spite. You can't put bees back there." "Oh, don't worry," I said. "It's not just bees. It's milkweed, coneflowers, salvia, an herb spiral, and, if we have room, a shaded seating area for school kids to come learn about native species. I've already spoken to the city. They love it. I'm calling it the Serenity Grove." I tilted my head. "Nice name, right?" Karen's nostrils flared so hard I thought her sunglasses might fog. "This is harassment. You're doing this to provoke me." "No," I said, stepping closer, my voice calm as ever. "This is what I'd be doing whether you lived there or not. The fact that your house now backs directly onto a legally protected teaching garden is just a delightful coincidence." She stormed off, muttering about permits and city council and aggressive floral encroachment. I turned back to the crew and pointed to the center of the lot. "Let's start with the clover berm. I want it blooming by next month." Over the next week, the transformation was glorious. The old weeds were tilled and composted. Raised beds were framed and filled. I ordered native plants by the dozens. Things with names Karen wouldn't understand but would definitely learn to fear. Goldenrod, Joe Pye weed, Rudbeckia. Plants that attracted butterflies, bees, hummingbirds, and, to Karen's horror, even more life. I installed a modest sign at the front of the lot, Serenity Grove, Community Pollinator and Education Garden, brought to you by local residents. Below it, in smaller letters, "Visitors welcome, except skunks, we learned our lesson." That part made the neighborhood laugh. Karen, on the other hand, nearly collapsed when the first school group visited. 20 second graders with wide eyes and bug nets wandered the path that ran just feet from her fence line. One of them pointed to her wind chimes and asked if they were part of the display. Another mistook her hydrangeas for giant mutant cauliflower. Karen sent a letter to the city claiming that the garden was attracting unlicensed children. The city wrote back saying they encouraged unstructured outdoor learning and thanked her for her interest in youth development. By now, Karen's paranoia had bloomed faster than the flowers. She was convinced I was tracking her movements through the garden, that I had installed secret speakers to annoy her with bee noises, that I was planning to release skunks again. She installed privacy panels on her fence, which I immediately blocked with trellises and climbing vines. She blared classical music from a Bluetooth speaker hidden in a fake rock, trying to ward off pests. The bees seemed to enjoy it. Then, in a fit of desperation, she tried to one-up me. She hired a landscaping team to convert her backyard into a certified monarch sanctuary. The problem? She had no clue how to do it. She picked the wrong milkweed, overwatered everything, and used a pesticide-laced mulch that killed off the caterpillars before they could so much as nibble. A week later, the city revoked her certification. Her sign, Karen's Butterfly Kingdom, was quietly removed in the night. That's when she snapped. It was a Wednesday evening. I was hosting a small volunteer planting session in Serenity Grove when we heard the unmistakable sound of ceramic breaking. We turned and saw Karen, standing on a step ladder at the edge of her yard, hurling decorative garden gnomes over the fence into the lot. One bounced off a planter and shattered at my feet. Another landed in the birdbath. The third struck a volunteer's tote bag, causing a minor panic until someone realized it was just a hollow plastic model. Everyone froze. Karen, panting, mascara slightly smudged, hissed through the lattice. "Stop ruining this neighborhood. Just stop." And then she climbed down and slammed her back door so hard it rattled the wind chimes. The police were called. Not by me, but by the volunteer who'd taken the gnome hit. When the officer arrived, Karen tried to spin it as a symbolic gesture of protest. The officer, a soft-spoken guy with a buzz cut and a resting patient's face, listened carefully, then asked if she was admitting to throwing objects onto someone else's property. She stammered. He nodded. "That's trespassing, ma'am. Also vandalism. Also kind of weird." She got off with a warning, but the damage was done. The story spread fast, mostly because one of the volunteers had captured the whole scene on video and posted it with the caption, "When HOA Queens Attack." It got hundreds of shares in local groups, and even made it to the town subreddit. My favorite comment: "Imagine throwing gnomes at a garden and losing. Peak Karen." After that, Karen disappeared for a bit. Her blinds stayed shut. Her front yard went slightly unkempt. Rumors floated: she was traveling for stress relief, or seeing a suburban therapist, or attending an HOA boot camp in Scottsdale. The truth was less exciting. She was hiding, and licking her wounds. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Serenity Grove was thriving. Kids were visiting weekly. I'd even partnered with the nearby retirement community to let seniors tend sections of the garden as part of their therapy programs. One sweet lady named Bernice had claimed the lavender patch and added a bench with her name carved into it. Lavender Ladies' Corner, we called it. Karen would have hated it. Too much joy. Too little control. The victory wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the gentle buzz of bees. The slow sprawl of creeping time across a path. The delighted gasp of a child who just spotted a butterfly. Karen had tried to rule through fear and pettiness. I'd planted peace, and peace had won. 3 weeks of Karen's silence was enough to make the birds nervous. I'd started to believe, foolishly, that maybe the gnome-throwing meltdown had been her final act. Maybe she'd gone to therapy. Maybe Todd had staged a home intervention involving wine, a power-washed patio, and an ultimatum. But deep down, I knew better. Karen didn't retreat in defeat, she reloaded. And the quieter she got, the bigger the storm she was preparing. That storm arrived on a Monday morning in the form of a city inspection notice duct-taped to my front gate. Not a standard envelope, not even mailed, just slapped on like a warning label. Notice of Emergency Public Health Inspection. The words were printed in bold red ink, stamped by the Office of Sanitation, and demanded immediate access to my compost area, bee boxes, and water storage. The reason? Suspected hazardous materials and vermin habitat. At first, I thought it was a prank. The language was too dramatic. But the seal at the bottom was real, as was the signature. I called the listed number and confirmed it. Yes, the inspection was real, and yes, it had been requested in response to multiple urgent complaints. I didn't have to ask who. I could practically smell the passive-aggressive perfume wafting off the paper. When the inspector arrived the next morning, he was polite, professional, and already exhausted. "To be honest," he said while glancing over his clipboard, "I'm not expecting to find anything. This request was, let's just say, flagged." He used air quotes for hazardous. I nodded and led him around the property. We walked the perimeter, the inspector scribbling notes and occasionally stopping to sniff something or glance at the bee boxes. Everything was pristine. The compost was sealed and turned properly, the water barrels mosquito-safe, the hives calm. Still, protocol was protocol. He tested the soil, checked for rodent activity, even opened a few storage bins. Nothing. Then he spotted something behind one of the raised beds. A plastic bag, half buried in the mulch, tucked just out of sight. He pulled it out, peeled it open, and froze. Inside were 3 dead rats. Poisoned. Bloated. Fresh. I stared at the bag for a moment, the blood draining from my face, not out of guilt, but out of sheer, bone-deep rage. "That's not mine," I said slowly. "Someone planted that." The inspector looked at me, face unreadable. "You're not the first person to say that." He took photos, sealed the bag, and muttered something about evidence. "We'll get this tested. See what kind of poison was used. But if someone placed it here to frame you, they were sloppy." He turned the bag over, revealing a tiny tear in the corner. Caught in the plastic was a pink sticker. A price tag. From Karen's favorite boutique garden shop. The inspector raised an eyebrow. I said nothing. He took the bag and left, promising to follow up once lab results were in. I thanked him, walked back to my garden, and sat down in the dirt. I wasn't angry that Karen had tried to frame me. I was angry that she'd gone this far. Endangering wildlife. Littering poison. Just to maintain control over a neighborhood that no longer listened to her. It wasn't pettiness anymore. It was desperation. I called my lawyer. By Thursday, I had 2 things in motion. A formal cease and desist order citing harassment, and a city council petition to investigate Karen for fraudulent health code complaints. The cease and desist was delivered by a deputy sheriff, who apparently had to wait 10 minutes while Karen yelled through the door about identity theft and deep state soil agents. The city petition? Well, that took on a life of its own. Once I posted about it, carefully, respectfully, without naming names, residents came out of the woodwork. Turns out Karen hadn't just targeted me. She'd filed nuisance reports against the couple with solar panels, the teenager who practiced guitar on his porch, and even the church that ran summer picnic. By the weekend, the petition had over 120 signatures. The council had no choice but to respond. Karen's response was cinematic. She emerged from her house at 9 a.m. sharp on Saturday, wearing what can only be described as courtroom couture, a navy blue pantsuit, pearl earrings, and a stack of binders clutched to her chest like armor. She marched straight to the community bulletin board in the park and stapled a manifesto, yes, a literal manifesto, titled Declaration of Neighborhood Values. It was 6 pages long. I read the whole thing, twice. Highlights included: suburban serenity requires central leadership. Unchecked gardening is an act of rebellion. Compost bins encourage Marxist thinking. By noon, someone had taped a banana peel to the front page. By evening, The entire bulletin board was filled with parody declarations, including one that simply said, "Let the bees decide." The city council met 3 days later in a packed town hall. Karen attended, of course, binder in hand, hair lacquered into a helmet. I sat in the back row with Bernice, the lavender lady, and a few neighbors who had brought wildflower bouquets in silent protest. Karen spoke for 20 minutes. Ranted, really. About health hazard. About renegade horticulture. About skunk warfare. She even waved printed photos of the rat bag like it was Exhibit A in a courtroom drama. The council listened politely, then asked her a few questions. One councilwoman asked if Karen had any evidence that I, or anyone, had planted the rats. Karen responded by accusing the council of being pollinator sympathizers. Then they let me speak. I didn't rant. I calmly explained the events of the past few months. I provided documentation, photos, permits, community support letters. I presented the lab results, which confirmed the rats had been killed with a specific rodenticide not approved for residential use. The packaging matched products sold at exactly one store in town. I didn't say Karen's name. I didn't have to. The council issued a public warning about false complaints. They announced a new review board to filter future neighborhood dispute. Karen's name was not officially included, but we all saw the writing on the wall. That night Karen's house went dark. No porch lights. No decorative solar path LEDs. Nothing. Like she'd unplugged herself from suburbia entirely. Serenity Grove bloomed brighter than ever. The next month brought new additions. A butterfly mural painted by local students, a composting workshop hosted by a chef, and a small donation box that overflowed weekly. I started getting letters. Thank you notes, drawings from kids, a hand-carved bee charm from an elderly gentleman who said the garden helped him through grief. And then, one quiet morning, as I was weeding near the edge of the property, I heard footsteps on gravel. I turned and saw Todd, Karen's husband, holding a small cardboard box. He looked sheepish. "Hey," he said, nodding toward the ground. "She's leaving. Moving in with her sister in Arizona. I'm selling the place." I blinked. "Really?" He nodded. "She said the neighborhood's lost its vision. I think she means it's no longer scared of her." I didn't know what to say. I didn't gloat. I just waited. Todd handed me the box. "She told me to throw this out. Figured you'd want a look." Inside were 3 gnomes. Cracked, paint-chipped, but familiar. One even had a tiny dent from the birdbath impact. I smiled. "Thanks, Todd." He gave me a half salute and walked off. I buried the gnomes beneath the herb spiral. Like time capsules. Like trophies.